She was called weak, pushed to the ground in front of everyone. A woman with a simple ponytail, a worn wooden bracelet around her wrist, stood quietly in a dojo filled with towering men. The head instructor sneered, barely acknowledging her presence. "Don't worry, she won't last 30 seconds." Someone chuckled. But just 14 seconds later, the entire room fell silent. The strongest man in class lay still on the mat, and she, the one they dismissed, was the reason he tapped out. No one knew she carried a secret, a promise made to someone who was no longer here. A small, quiet act of kindness was about to change everything. Emily Dawson adjusted her brown belt with deliberate care, standing beside her old sedan in the parking lot. The late afternoon sun reflected off the glass facade of Elite Combat Academy, casting a warm, blinding glow across the pavement. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was here to keep a promise. Her hand instinctively brushed against the small wooden bracelet on her wrist, a gift from her grandfather the day she earned her black belt. That belt, however, was folded neatly at home. Today, she wore brown. On purpose. "I'll do it for you, Grandpa," she whispered, voice barely audible over the soft rustle of autumn leaves. She reached into her wallet and looked at his photo. The kind eyes, the half-smile, the quiet strength. He taught her everything, not just how to fight, but how to carry herself. With grace, with purpose, and with silence when the world got too loud. Today was the first step. Emily pulled open the heavy glass door. The scent of sweat, disinfectant, and worn athletic tape greeted her like an old memory. Inside, the air buzzed with thuds of bodies hitting Matt's shoes, squeaking against vinyl, and short, sharp breaths of sparring students. At the front desk, a young man, broad shoulders, strong jaw, dead eyes, didn't bother looking up from his phone. "I'm here for the advanced class," Emily said, voice even humble. "Brown belts and up only." He muttered, eyes scanning her faded gi and soft features. She simply nodded, gesturing to her belt. "I've trained 15 years. A pause. Then a half shrug. "Sign the waiver. Locker rooms are back there. Class starts in 10. She signed with a different name. Emily Collins, her mother's maiden name. Everything about her presence here was intentional. Not to deceive, but to observe. To feel what so many newcomers, especially women, felt in spaces like this, unseen, unwelcome, and still walking forward. The locker room was bright, sterile, almost too clean. Emily found an empty bench and began changing, folding her street clothes neatly, slipping into her gi, and tying her brown belt with practiced ease. She removed her jewelry except for the wooden bracelet. That stayed. Around her, a few women prepared in silence. Tense silence. Muscles, tight expressions sharper than they needed to be, like they were preparing for battle, not practice. A tall woman with a purple belt approached, arms crossed. "New face," she said flatly. "You just move here." Emily smiled politely. "Yeah, thought I'd check out the local scene." The woman nodded, but her eyes didn't warm. "I'm Dana. Heads up, Torres doesn't think much of women past blue belt. Unless you've got medals, he'll assume you're wasting his time." Emily nodded, calm. "Thanks for the warning." She didn't come to be welcomed. She came to watch and feel what others felt every single day. As Emily stepped onto the mat, the room shifted. Not in volume, there was still the sound of chatter, the slap of bare feet, but in atmosphere. A subtle change, like a draft of cold air slipping under the door. Men glanced over their shoulders. Some smirked. Some squinted puzzled. Most simply looked away. Emily walked to the edge, bowed respectfully, a gesture few returned, and found her place among the other brown belts. They were all bigger, broader. Their confidence came not from discipline, but assumption. At the center stood Gabriel Torres, black belt instructor, jaw like granite. He paused mid-sentence when he noticed her. His smile curled with something performative. "Well, what do we have here?" He called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ladies' self-defense class is on Thursday, sweetheart." Chuckles rippled through the room. Emily didn't flinch. She bowed again, eyes steady. 15 years training, sir. Brown belt. Let the test begin. Torres's grin widened, polished and condescending. Is that so? He said, pacing in front of the line. Well then, let's see what 15 years gets you. He clapped twice. Line up by rank. Students scrambled into formation. Emily moved without hesitation, taking her place beside men who outweighed her by at least 30 pounds each. In the far corner, Sarah stood blending in with the others, phone carefully angled. The red light was off, but it was recording. Today, we're working triangle escapes, Torres announced, eyes scanning the line until they landed deliberately on her. Our new friend can help me demonstrate. A few eyebrows raised. Using the new student, a woman. Emily stepped forward, calm, focused. This was normal. This was predictable. But the glint in Torres's eyes wasn't just about teaching. It was performance. It was ego. And it was just beginning. They met in the center of the mat. Emily bowed. Torres didn't. So he said, circling her like a showman, "Where did you train?" She answered honestly. "Morgan Jiu-Jitsu Academy." His brow twitched. "Never heard of it. Do you compete?" "No." "My teacher believed jiu-jitsu was for self-growth, not trophies." A few quiet chuckles from the students. Torres smiled, wide venom behind his teeth. Ah, a spiritual type. He didn't wait. Without warning, he shot in for a takedown. Emily let it happen just enough to protect herself without exposing her real level. He drove her down hard, louder than needed. "See this," he said to the class, establishing side control. A real brown belt would have sprawled. "This is what happens when you train in strip mall dojos." The insult to her grandfather stung. But Emily breathed through it. She wasn't here to win. She was here to witness, to record, to remember. Torres tightened his grip. The pressure was real, but so was the intention behind it. He wanted her to squirm. Emily didn't. She waited for the right moment, then made a smooth, technical escape. Not flashy, just clean, precise, enough to prove she wasn't lost. Around them, a few heads tilted. Not admiration, just confusion. Torres, however, wasn't impressed. "Lucky move," he muttered under his breath, then louder for all to hear. "Let's try something else." The next 10 minutes were a showcase of veiled disrespect. Torres adjusted the drills, escalating their difficulty. His tone sharp, his posture aggressive. Emily followed along, never pushing, never retreating. Each movement calculated not to outperform him, but to stay in the fight. She caught Sarah's eye across the room. The phone was still aimed, recording everything. This wasn't just a spar, it was evidence, and it was building minute by minute. At the end of the demonstration, Torres stood up. Emily was still on the mat, breathing steady. He turned to the class. "This," he announced, gesturing to her, "is what's wrong with jiu-jitsu today. People walking around with belts they haven't earned." Then he offered her his hand. For a split second, it looked civil. But as she reached up, he yanked her up sharply, hard enough to make her stumble. A few gasps muffled laughter. He leaned in, but made sure everyone heard. "Too weak," he said flatly. "Women like you should stick to yoga." Emily didn't answer, didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her GI and stepped back in line. But inside her chest, the memory of her grandfather's voice surfaced. "True strength isn't how hard you hit. It's how deeply you stand still when others try to knock you down." And she stood, still. Torres clapped his hands. "Pair up," he barked. "Start drilling." Emily didn't choose a partner, she was chosen. A man named Keith walked over. Massive build, heavy brow, a smirk waiting to happen. "Guess I'm with you," he said, looking down at her. "I'll go easy." Emily offered a polite nod. "Thanks." Her voice was even, almost kind. They began working on the triangle escape, or tried to. Keith applied more pressure than necessary. Torres walked by and called out, "More pressure, Keith, she needs to feel what a real triangle is like." Keith grinned, complied. The choke wasn't tight, but it was uncomfortable, excessive, unnecessary. Emily stayed calm, using her training to relieve the worst of it without breaking character. To them, she struggled. To Sarah's camera, she endured. This wasn't training, this was testing, and Emily knew every second she stayed on that mat, she was holding space for someone else. Torres crouched beside them, his voice calm, controlled, public. "Her defense is all wrong," he said. "Let me show you." He reached for Emily's arm, repositioning it. But not to improve. No. He shifted her grip in a way that made the triangle escape less effective, not more. A deliberate move. A trap in the guise of guidance. Emily recognized it instantly. Either he was deliberately sabotaging her, or he didn't know the technique as well as he claimed. She looked down, nodded respectfully. "Thank you, sir." She made no correction, no protest. From across the room, Sarah repositioned herself, capturing it all. The misplaced instruction, the unspoken imbalance, the quiet injustice. Emily didn't need to expose him. He was doing that himself, and her silence spoke louder than any argument ever could. Midway through the class, Torres stood and clapped. "Let's make this interesting," he said, voice casual but sharp. "Round-robin sparring, 30-second rounds. Winner stays on." A murmur swept through the students. It wasn't standard for a technique class, but clearly, it wasn't about technique anymore. They formed a circle around the mat. Feet shifted. Breath slowed. Excitement for some, dread for others. Torres scanned the room with performative ease, then pointed. "Collins, you're up first." Emily stepped forward. Then he added, almost too casually, "Against me." Silence. Instructors didn't usually spar with new students, especially not on their first day, especially not in front of everyone. He smiled. Cold. "Unless—" "You're not up for it." Emily bowed. "I'm happy to train, sir." Her voice was still steady, still polite, but something had shifted. The air grew still. The room held its breath. They met in the center of the circle. Torres stood tall, confident. Emily poised calm but alert. "No bows," he said. "We'll start standing. Let's see what 15 years gets you." They circled. Emily moved with deliberate care, watching his feet, his weight shifts. Torres, on the other hand, moved like a man certain of victory. "Attack me," he goaded. "Come on, brown belt. Show us what you've learned." Emily shot in with a clean, controlled single-leg attempt, just enough to engage. Torres countered hard. Too hard. He slammed her to the mat with force that didn't belong in a demo. The air shifted. A few students looked away. He dropped on top of her, controlling position. "Too weak," he announced just loud enough. "This is why upper belts don't belong on women. They can't hold position. No structure." Emily looked up at him. Calm. Focused. Her silence was no longer surrender. It was warning. Torres transitioned to a Kimura, grip a shoulder lock with dangerous potential. The torque was subtle at first. Then, it grew. Fast. Emily felt it immediately. Not a demo, not a drill. This was meant to intimidate, maybe even injure. Through clenched teeth, he growled low, "Tap, or don't. Doesn't matter to me." Pain pulsed through her shoulder, sharp, hot, familiar. The kind that leaves damage. Her eyes flicked toward the edge of the mat. Sarah had moved. Camera still rolling, framing it all. Around them, the room was unnervingly quiet. Some students shifted uncomfortably. Others watched. Torres leaned in harder. "You're only making it worse." And still, Emily said nothing. Her lips parted just enough for breath. The wooden bracelet on her wrist tapped softly against the mat with each strained movement. She wasn't afraid. She was calculating. And somewhere deep inside, something had just changed. Torres cranked the pressure, harder. The torque in her shoulder screamed. But Emily didn't cry out, didn't tap, didn't move yet. Instead, her mind drifted. To a wooden floor, to age 12, to her grandfather's voice, calm as breath. Jiu-Jitsu is leverage over force. But never use it to hurt. Use it to protect. Use it to teach. She remembered how his hands moved. Gentle, exact, like music, not war, and how he warned her the ones who chase power often need it most. Back on the mat, Torres's grip tightened again. Still too proud, he whispered, breath hot with ego. Emily opened her eyes, saw his face, not rage, desperation. He needed to win. She didn't. But something in her shifted. This wasn't about her anymore. And in the stillness between pain and purpose, she made a choice. Torres leaned his weight in, forcing her shoulder into a breaking point. "Tap," he hissed. "You'll regret it if you don't." But Emily didn't move. Not at first. She was listening. To her own breath, to every fiber of her body, to her grandfather's voice like wind through old trees. Sometimes the lesson must be taught, not to prove, but to remind. With a single controlled shift of her hips, Emily created space. Tiny, just enough. Torres instinctively pressed forward, overcommitting, exactly as she predicted. She whispered, almost a prayer. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. This wasn't the plan, but this is the moment." Then smooth as water she flowed into a reversal, a movement few had ever seen, a signature transition her grandfather created. In less than a second, Torres was no longer in control, and for the first time, he knew it. Torres stumbled just half a step, but it was all she needed. In one flowing motion, Emily rotated, hooked his arm, shifted her hips, and locked her legs across his chest. Armbar. Clean. Exact. Undeniable. His arm was fully extended. Her control flawless. There was no brute strength, only gravity, and leverage, and truth. Torres's eyes widened, shock flickering into panic. He tried to pull back, twist out, but every movement only deepened the trap. The room had gone silent. No footsteps, no breath, just the faint mechanical hum of the air conditioning and the sound of his ego unraveling. Emily didn't speak. She didn't tighten. She simply held him there, letting him feel it, letting everyone see. Not to hurt, not to humiliate, but to remind. Skill is not loud. Strength is not cruel. And sometimes, silence is the sharpest blade. Torres grunted, twisted, pulled, but it was over. He was caught, and he knew it. 1 second, 2, 3. Emily adjusted minutely, just enough pressure to remind, not to harm. 4, 5. His strength began to falter. Desperation replaced dominance. Technique had answered ego and won. 6, 7. "Let go," he muttered, low and ragged. But she didn't. Not until he accepted it. 8, 9, 10. A murmur stirred in the watching crowd, shock melting into something quieter. Respect. Maybe even shame. 11, 12. Tap. Emily said gently, her voice almost a whisper, "It's okay." 13. Torres's palm slapped the mat once, twice. The sound cracked like thunder in a silent gym. Emily released the hold, immediately rolled away and knelt, then bowed. No celebration, no smile, just grace. She extended a hand, one last gesture, the kind her grandfather taught her. Torres didn't take her hand. He stood on his own rough, rigid, adjusting his gui like a man trying to recover his balance physically and otherwise. His face was unreadable. Humiliation. Confusion. But somewhere, buried deep, a flicker of something else. Respect. Emily remained kneeling, still, centered, just as her grandfather taught her. The room was frozen. No one moved, no one spoke. 14 seconds ago, she was too weak. Now, even the walls seemed to breathe slower. Keith stared. Dina's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Sarah kept her phone lowered. Now she didn't need to film anymore. The moment had spoken for itself. Emily rose quietly. She didn't gloat, didn't explain. She simply walked back to her water bottle, sat down, and took a sip as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But everything had, and everyone in that room knew it. Emily wiped her face with a towel, her movements slow, deliberate. like she hadn't just cracked the spine of the room's unspoken hierarchy. Around her, the murmurs began. Who is she? Did you see how clean that transition was? She didn't even flinch. Keith approached awkward now. That earlier smirk? Gone. That was incredible, he said, almost apologetic. Where'd you learn that? Emily just smiled faintly. My grandfather taught me. She didn't offer more, didn't need to. Before he could ask again, another voice chimed in, sharp, suspicious, but not hostile. That wasn't a brown belt move, said Dina, stepping closer. That was high-level black belt, competition grade. Emily looked at her. Calm, honest. My grandfather had some unique ideas about teaching. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either, not yet. Because Emily wasn't here to impress, she was here to reveal. Before anyone could ask more, Torres raised his voice. Back to drilling, he snapped. His tone was tighter than before, forced calm stretched over a crack. Collins, take a break, he added quickly. You look tired. It wasn't concern, it was dismissal, a small attempt to reclaim the room. Emily simply bowed and stepped off the mat. No resistance, no sarcasm. Let him have his moment. She didn't need it. But the students looked at her differently now. Not as an outsider, not as a woman, but as something rare, a quiet contradiction to everything they'd been taught. Sarah moved closer, playing the curious classmate. That was amazing, she whispered. Emily just shrugged. He underestimated me, she said simply. It happens. Behind them, Torres adjusted his gi again. His hands fumbled just slightly. For the first time, he looked unsure. Dina walked over as the others returned to drills. She didn't smile, but her eyes held something different now. Measured, focused. Not doubt. Recognition. That wasn't just good, she said, arms crossed. That was trained, polished, like muscle memory. Emily sipped water, expression unreadable. My grandfather had a different way of teaching, she replied, old school. Old school doesn't teach black belt transitions to brown belts, Dina said. Her tone wasn't hostile, just honest. You moved like someone who's been teaching, not learning. Emily gave a half smile. I've been doing this a long time. Silence hung between them. Then Dina said more quietly, Who are you really? Before Emily could answer, Torres clapped again. Partner up, he barked, trying to reassert rhythm. He pointed at her this time with forced composure. Collins, you're with Jason. Dina's brow furrowed. Jason, national champion, poster boy of the academy. She leaned in. He's setting you up. Emily nodded. Calm, I know. Jason stepped onto the mat. Tall, fast, black belt, national-level competitor face on posters lining the academy walls. He glanced at Emily. Not cocky, not dismissive, just cautious. He'd seen what she'd done. Torres crossed his arms from the sidelines. Start from closed guard. Jason on top. A smirk ghosted across his lips. This should be instructional. Emily lay back, set her guard. Jason moved in controlled. Professional. No trash talk, no excess force, but it was clear this was a test, not just of her technique, but of how she handled pressure, of how she responded under scrutiny. And she did what she always had. She flowed. Every movement, minimal, efficient, exact. Not a show of dominance, a masterclass in balance. Students paused mid-drill, eyes drifted. They weren't watching Jason anymore, they were watching her. Even Torres had gone silent. 5 minutes. That's all it took. In those 5 minutes, Emily countered every one of Jason's attacks, fluid, composed, never rushed. She didn't overpower, she neutralized. When he pressured, she redirected. When he tried to pass guard, she shifted angles feet like brushstrokes. Not once did she reach for a submission. Not once did she show off. But no one watching was fooled anymore. Jason stepped back after the round chest heaving. He didn't look frustrated, he looked amazed. From the sidelines, Torres clapped once. Too sharp, too loud. Enough. Water break. He walked toward her, slow, assessing. Then, voice low. Who are you really? Not angry this time, just unsettled. Emily met his eyes, level, calm. I told you. I trained with Master James Morgan. His expression changed instantly. Frozen. Recognition blooming behind his eyes. Morgan, he whispered. You mean the James Morgan? She nodded. Once. Morgan Torres repeated. His voice wasn't loud now. It was small, like a memory spoken aloud. You mean James Morgan. From the old lineage. Brazil, 1960s. Emily nodded again. I'm his granddaughter. Simple. Quiet. Like saying I am. Silence fell again deeper this time. Not awkward. Sacred. Students froze mid-sip, mid-step. Even Jason looked stunned. Torres took a slow breath. I watched tapes of him when I was 15, he said almost to himself. The way he moved. Like water folding around fire. Emily didn't reply. She didn't need to, because in that moment, everything he thought about her shifted. She wasn't just a brown belt, or a hidden black belt. She was part of a name he'd once worshipped, and suddenly, every insult, every test, every show of ego felt like a crack in his own reflection. Torres stood frozen, the weight of her name settling in. Emily stepped slightly closer, still calm, still steady. My grandfather passed away. 3 months ago, she said quietly. Before he died, he asked me to protect what Jiu-Jitsu was meant to be. Not titles, not dominance, but respect, precision, growth. Torres said nothing. Emily continued. I heard about this place. The culture, the stories. She looked around the gym. The pressure, the hazing, the way women are written off before they touch the mat. Her voice didn't shake, but it carried everything she'd been holding. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. She glanced toward Sarah. This was never about revenge. She looked back at Torres. I came here to feel what others feel, to see if the fear was real, and it was. Not angry, not bitter, just true. And somehow that made it louder than shouting ever could. Torres didn't speak. He didn't look away. But something behind his eyes shifted like a tight knot quietly beginning to loosen. Emily didn't press. She just stood there letting the silence do what words couldn't. Around them, the class had stopped pretending to train. Everyone listened. No timer, no orders, just stillness. Then Emily asked, not accusing, just curious, how many black belts have walked out of this place before they bloomed? She turned to the group, her voice even. How many women were made to feel small before they even stepped on the mat? The questions weren't rhetorical. They weren't dramatic. They were real and raw. A few students looked at the floor. Others looked at Torres. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. Because when truth walks in without armor, it's harder to fight, harder to deny, and hardest of all, to forget. I didn't come here to take anyone down, Emily said softly, meeting Torres's gaze again. I came to document, to feel, to listen. She gestured subtly toward Sarah in the corner, still holding the phone, no longer hiding it. This wasn't for social media. It's for a presentation. A workshop on inclusion in martial arts. She paused. Let that settle. Because if we want to protect this art, we need to look at what's creeping into it. The ego, the fear, the silence. Torres swallowed hard, jaw tense. I didn't set you up, she added. I gave you the same courtesy you give others, a chance to show who you are, when no one's watching. Then she looked around the room. I'm not here to shame this place. I'm here because it's not too late if someone's willing to listen. And, for the first time, everyone was. For a few long seconds, no one moved. Then a voice. Low. Careful. I almost quit, said one of the women near the back. First week here, someone told me I'd never make it past blue because I didn't look the part. A ripple went through the group. Not loud, just honest. Another voice this time from one of the younger men. Torres benched me for 3 weeks straight. Said I lacked aggression. I thought maybe I just wasn't built for this." He looked at Emily, eyes clear. "Now, I think maybe I was just in the wrong kind of room." A third student nodded quietly, and then another. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a shared exhale. The kind that only comes when truth is spoken, and someone's finally brave enough to name it out loud. And Emily had given them that breath. Torres stood still, not defensive, not angry, just quiet. He looked around the room, really looked. Saw faces he'd passed over 100 times, faces that had tried to impress, to endure, to belong. And now, he saw something else. Honesty. Raw. Unfiltered. Undeniable. He turned to Emily. His voice was low, barely audible. "When I was a kid, I saw a clip of your grandfather rolling in silence. I watched it so many times the tape broke." He looked down at his own hands. Rough. Still shaking slightly. Not from anger, from awareness. He moved with something I never had. Calm. Control. Purpose. He looked up again slower this time. "I forgot why I started. Somewhere along the way, I started building walls instead of bridges." And for the first time since she'd arrived, Emily said nothing. She just listened. The room stayed quiet, but it no longer felt heavy. Just full. Torres stepped closer to Emily. No longer taller, no longer louder. Just present. He extended his hand. Not as a challenge, not as an apology. Just open. Real. Human. Emily looked at it for a beat, then reached out. Shook it. Firm. No resentment. Torres spoke again lower now. "You didn't come here to win." He nodded. "I see that now." Emily held his gaze. "I came here to remind." They both stood still, surrounded by students who'd just seen something rare, not a takedown, not a victory, but transformation. One that started with confrontation but ended in choice. And for the first time in years, Torres didn't feel like an instructor protecting status. He felt like a student again. That was the moment that mattered, and everyone in the room felt it. 6 months later. Emily pushed open the same glass door, but the air inside was different now. No longer tense, no longer sharp. Laughter echoed from the back mats. A teenage girl drilled sweeps with a new partner, giggling confident. No one rushed her. No one mocked her. Above the front desk hung a new banner, Morgan Elite Jiu-Jitsu. Same space. Different soul. The trophy cases were still there, but beside them stood framed prints of principles. Respect. Humility. Community. Technical excellence. Photos of new students, diverse smiling, lined the wall. Next to them a portrait of James Morgan, framed in soft light. Emily smiled, set her bag down, and bowed gently at the threshold. She hadn't changed the world. But she'd changed this room, this corner. Sometimes, that's enough to start everything. From his office, Torres stepped out, no longer the loudest presence in the room. His stance was different now, not smaller, just softer. He carried a clipboard but didn't bark instructions. Instead, he walked the mats, offering feedback, adjusting posture, pausing to listen. The edge in his voice, gone, replaced by something quieter, curiosity. When he spotted Emily, he smiled. Not a smirk, a real one. "You ready for the seminar?" he asked. His tone wasn't performative. It was almost excited. Behind him, instructors from other dojos were removing their shoes here to learn not to judge. Emily nodded. Always. Torres gestured toward the group. "I'm not the same teacher," he said. "Still not perfect. Still learning." She replied with a gentle look. "That's the point." They didn't shake hands this time. They just stood side by side, because now they were facing the same direction. Emily walked along the edge of the mat, watching the warm-ups begin. A young girl, maybe 12, fumbled with her belt. Another student, barely older, leaned over and helped her. No snickers, no sighs, just support. At the far end, 2 women drilled side control transitions, clean, technical, focused. One wore a white belt, the other purple. Both smiled after every rep. The energy in the room had shifted, not louder, but lighter, not softer, but safer. Sarah passed by with a camera rig now filming openly. This time, it wasn't for proof, it was for celebration. On the wall beneath James Morgan's portrait, someone had added a quote, "True victory isn't domination. It's lifting others up." Emily paused in front of it. She didn't cry. She didn't pose. She just bowed. The kind of bow that said, "We're just getting started." Emily stepped into the side hallway where her gear was waiting. She adjusted her black belt fingers, brushing lightly over the embroidery, James Morgan, and beneath it, Emily Dawson. Same thread, same legacy. In her bag was a stack of printed handouts, principles of inclusive instruction training progressions, methods to build trust before technique. But it wasn't paper she was carrying. It was everything she'd lived through, everything she refused to let fade. She glanced up at the mirror above the sink, not to check her reflection but to ground herself. No medals, no spotlight, just one teacher, showing up. She picked up her bracelet, worn wood slightly cracked, and slid it back onto her wrist. Then breathed in, and stepped back into the main room, not to prove, not to perform, but to plant something, quietly, on purpose, just like he taught her. Emily stood at the front of the mat. No podium, no microphone, just her barefoot belt, tied, eyes steady. Around her sat instructors from all over the region, some cautious, some curious, a few familiar. Keith was there now, silent and attentive. Even Jason, arms crossed but open. Torres sat near the back, notebook in hand. Emily spoke not like a champion, not like someone who'd won anything, just like someone who remembered what it felt like. To be overlooked. To be told you don't belong, and to stay anyway. "We don't fix martial arts by shouting," she began. "We fix it by listening, by remembering why we started, and who we might be pushing away without meaning to." No one interrupted. No one scrolled their phone. Because what she was saying wasn't new. It was what many had felt for years. They just hadn't had the words. Until now. Emily took a small photo from her folder, creased soft at the edges. It was her grandfather, mid-roll smile, half hidden behind focus. She held it up briefly, then set it down. Not to display, just to be near. He used to say, she began, eyes somewhere distant, "You don't really win in jiu-jitsu when someone taps." The room listened. Still, waiting. You win when they stand back up and still want to train with you. A long pause followed. Not awkward, absorbed. "Technique matters," she said. "Pressure matters, but, more than anything, people remember how you made them feel on the mat." She glanced across the group. Not fear, not shame, but seen, valued. Someone at the edge of the circle wiped their eyes. No one laughed. Because in that moment they weren't just learning to teach better, they were remembering why they started. Emily stepped back as the final words settled in the air. No one clapped. Not at first. They just sat there, quiet. Thoughtful, changed. Then someone stood, bowed, another followed, and then all of them. Not in unison, not choreographed. Just real, one by one. Torres was the last. He didn't rush. He just walked up to Emily, paused, then bowed deeply, lower than required. "Thank you," he said simply. No defense, no speech, just gratitude. Emily bowed in return, the same way her grandfather used to, not as a formality, but as an offering. Round the room the instructors lingered. Some exchanged emails, others shared quiet confessions. No trophies were handed out, no rankings changed. But something inside every person there shifted, and somehow that felt more permanent than any belt ever could. The mats were quiet now. The seminar over, footsteps faded, doors closed softly. Emily remained. She walked to the front of the room where his photo hung. James Morgan, frozen mid-bow, eyes kind, steady, timeless. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the bracelet, the one he'd given her the day she earned her black belt. Worn now, edges dulled, but whole. She placed it gently on the ledge below the frame. Just for a moment. Not as an offering, not as goodbye. Just a conversation. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I didn't raise my voice. I just stayed long enough for them to hear." She smiled softly, closed her eyes, breathed in, like he taught her. The true victory, she remembered him saying, isn't when you defeat someone. It's when they stand up differently. And now, they would. Outside the academy, golden afternoon light touched the windows. Inside, Emily stood alone, but not lonely. A new class filtered in, young, diverse, excited. Among them, a girl in a white belt. She smiled at Emily. No fear, just hope. And that was the real reward. Not applause, not recognition, but watching something grow. Where once there was silence. Torres passed by, giving her a respectful nod. Sarah waved from across the room, camera still rolling, but now capturing joy. Emily turned back, once glanced at the photo of her grandfather, the bracelet still resting beneath it. "The world doesn't change all at once," she whispered, "but it does change. One mat, one voice, one moment at a time." She walked out into the fading light, quiet, calm, strong. If this story touched something in you, share it. Let it remind someone. Kindness isn't weakness, it's legacy. And it always comes back.